Sleeping very well. But what I did last night was I fell asleep on the couch first, so I think I had like pre-gamed for my sleep. Hello. Quarantine does kind of suck. I hear that. How are the music levels? Is the music too loud? Hello, CJ. Hooray. Yes, we're going to finish this book today. I'm glad that you guys are pretty familiar with these books, because I haven't really heard many people, like, at least in my own circle of, like, IRL friends. I hadn't had any friends, really, that really had read the Wayside School series, so the fact that you guys remember these books makes me really happy. Okay, thank you for confirming music is fine. So I had read the first half of this book because it's a fairly short book last week, and now I plan to finish it today. So we had read the introduction and up to chapter 13, and now today we are going to read chapters 14 to chapters 30. So I know, but like I said, the chapters are only like 3 or 4 pages long, so it really doesn't take too much time. Thank you for shouting out, CJ. I'm glad you slept well, but also, yay, book! Yeah. I just hadn't been sleeping well lately. Like, I would get to sleep fine, but then I would, like, wake up in the middle of the night, or have you had those nights where you, like, dream so vividly, and then you wake up and you don't remember your dreams, but because you dreamed so vividly, you never really got into that, like, deep sleep? That was me for, like, a week. Oh, my sound keeps cutting. Be right back. Sounds good, sounds good. I am gonna go wipe my nose real quick before we start. Okay, I'm coming. All right. Let me take another sip of my coffee and then we'll get started. Yeah, I'm sorry for starting a few minutes late. I was just hanging out with Mom this morning because she's been going in late on Tuesdays. We were hanging out downstairs and I was watching her play Animal Crossing, and next thing I knew it was 10:50 and I was like, I gotta get upstairs. I've been dreaming vividly all week and I totally understand that. I woke up again last night from an intense dream. I saw the dream you posted in Discord, but like, I've been dreaming, but I haven't been able to remember those dreams. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know. I almost don't know what's better, if like you remember dreams or not. Because some dreams I don't want to remember, and I'm, glad that I don't, because I remember them being like scary or stressful or whatever. But I just opened my eyes, so I guess good timing. All right. I planned it for you, CJ. I wasn't too focused on where the music was from that opened it, but it felt familiar. This is a compilation video, so I have no idea what's coming in the video, but I just saw like the background changes in the video depending on what game it's from, and I was like, oh, this is an Ori song, because look at them. Okay. All right. Without further ado, we're going to jump right in. I hope you guys are cozy, have a beverage of your choice, and are ready to go. We're picking up with chapter 14, Sammy. It was a horrible, stinky, rainy day. Some rainy days are fun and exciting, but not this one. This one stunk. All the children were wet and wore smelly raincoats. The whole room smelled awful. "Ugh, it stinks in here," said Mauricia. Everybody laughed, but she was right. There was one good thing, however. There was a new boy in class. New kids are always fun. Except no one could even tell what the new boy looked like. He was completely covered by his raincoat. "Class," said Mrs. Jules, "I'd like you all to meet Sammy. Let us show him what a nice class we can be." Leslie walked up and smiled at Sammy, but her smile quickly turned into a frown. "You smell terrible," she said. "Leslie!" exclaimed Mrs. Jules. "That is no way to greet a new member of the class." Mrs. Jules wrote Leslie's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. But he does, Mrs. Jules, said Leslie. He smells awful. You're ugly, Sammy replied. Now, Sammy, that is no way to talk, said Mrs. Jules. Leslie's a very pretty girl. She's ugly, said Sammy. Allison spoke up. Well, you smell terrible and are probably even uglier, but nobody can even see you because you're hiding under that smelly old raincoat. That'll be enough of that, said Mrs. Jules. Now, Sammy, why don't you take off your coat and hang it in the closet? Let us all see how nice you look. I don't want to, you old windbag, said Sammy. That's because he's so ugly, said Leslie. I'm sure he's quite handsome, said Mrs. Jules. He's just shy. Here, let me help you. Mrs. Jules took off Sammy's coat for him, but underneath it was still another raincoat, even dirtier and smellier than the first one. They still couldn't see his face. Oh, now he smells even worse, said Mauricia. You don't exactly smell like a rose either, Sammy replied. Mrs. Jules took off his second raincoat, but there was still another one under that. And the smell became so bad that Mrs. Jules had to run and stick her head out the window to get some fresh air. You're all a bunch of pigs, Sammy screeched. Dirty, rotten pigs! The smell was overpowering. Sammy just stood there, hidden under his raincoats. Mrs. Jules wrote Sammy's name under the word discipline. Send him home on the kindergarten bus, said Joy. Not with me, said Todd. Mrs. Jules held her nose, walked up to Sammy, and removed his raincoat. She threw it out the window, but he still had on another one. Sammy hissed, Hey, old windbag, watch where you throw my good clothes! Mrs. Jules put a check next to Sammy's name on the blackboard. Then she took off another raincoat and threw it out the window. The smell got worse, for he still had on another one. Sammy began to laugh. His horrible laugh was even worse than his horrible voice. When Sammy first came into the room, he was 4 feet tall. But after Mrs. Jules removed 6 of his raincoats, he was only 3 feet tall, and there were still more raincoats to go. Mrs. Jules circled his name and removed another coat. She threw it out the window. Then she put a triangle around the circle and threw another one of his coats outside. She kept doing this until Sammy was only 1.5 feet high. With every coat she took off, Sammy's laugh got louder and the smell got worse. Some of the children held their ears. Others could hold only one ear because they were holding their nose with the other hand. It was hard to say what was worse, the laugh or the smell. Sammy stopped laughing and said, Hey, old windbag, if you take off one more of my coats and throw it out the window, I'll bite your head off. They smell too bad for me to allow them in my classroom, said Mrs. Jules. You can pick them up when you leave. They smell better than you do, pighead, Sammy shouted. Mrs. Jules didn't stop. She took off another one of his coats, then another and another. Sammy was only 4 inches tall, 3 inches tall, 2 inches tall. At last, she removed the final coat. All that was there was a dead rat. Well, I don't allow dead rats in my classroom, said Mrs. Jules. She picked it up by the tail, put it in a plastic bag, and threw it away. Mrs. Jules didn't allow dead rats in her class. Todd once brought in a dead rat for show and tell, and Mrs. Jules made him throw that one away too. I'm glad Sammy isn't allowed in our classroom, said Rondi. I didn't like him very much. Yes, said Mrs. Jules. We caught another one. Dead rats were always trying to sneak into Mrs. Jules' class. That was the 3rd one she'd caught since September. End of chapter 14. I'll just avoid these bad dreams by not sleeping. Wow, who is this? Hi, Mr. Pancake. How's it going? The new kid is probably named Sammy Stinks. Hey, HS. Leslie sounds like most people upon first meeting me. Whatever. Sammy dishing it right back. Sorry, not my fault. I'm a piggy. No dead rats in the classroom. Scam. I remember this chapter extremely vividly. What about live rats? Yeah, it's difficult to catch a dead rat. Hang on, let me fix my green screen a little bit. I see it's kind of... Whoops. That seems better. Okay. Thank you for the claps. Thank you so much for the claps. Okay. We're moving along. Chapter 15, Didi. This story contains a problem and a solution. Didi was a mousy-looking kid. Unlike most children at Wayside School, she liked recess better than spelling. As soon as the recess bell rang, she would jump up from her seat and run out the door. There were big signs in Wayside School on every floor. No jumping down the stairs. Didi never seemed to notice those signs. She jumped down the stairs. Some children took the stairs 2 at a time. Didi took them 10 at a time. That was on the way down. It was funny, she never seemed to be quite in the same hurry on the way back up. There was another sign at Wayside School. No cutting across the grass. Didi must not have ever seen that one either. She cut across the grass and ran up to Lewis, the yard teacher. I want a green ball, Didi said. The green balls were the best. I'm all out of green balls, said Lewis. Okay, then I want a red ball, said Didi. The red balls were just about as good as the green balls. They didn't bounce as high, but actually sometimes you don't want a ball to bounce too high. I'm all out of red balls too, said Lewis. Do you have anything left? Asked Didi. Didi meant anything besides the yellow ball. There was one yellow ball at Wayside School, and Lewis was always trying to get rid of it. It didn't bounce, and it never went the way it was kicked. Anything at all? Asked Didi. Today is your lucky day, said Lewis. I have one ball left. Just for you, the one and only yellow ball. No thanks, said Didi. Oh, come on, take it, said Lewis. Why don't you ever have any green or red balls? Asked Didi. Well, I do, said Lewis, but the other children ask first, and by the time you get out here, they're all gone. But that's because I have to come all the way from the 30th story. How do you expect me to compete with the kids from the 1st or 2nd? She asked. Well, that's why I saved you the yellow ball, said Lewis. Everybody wanted it, but I saved it just for you. I bet, said Didi. She took the yellow ball and bounced it on the ground. It stopped dead with a thud. She stepped back, ran up, and kicked it. It went backwards over her head. She didn't bother chasing it. Instead, she played hopscotch with Ginny and Leslie. She thought it was disgusting. The next day, Didi asked Mrs. Jules if she could go to recess early. Why? Asked Mrs. Jules. So I can get a green ball before Lewis gives them all away, said Didi. Well, I'm glad you have a good reason, said Mrs. Jules. Yes, you may go, but first, spell Mississippi for me. Spelling was not Didi's best subject. By the time she finally got it right, she was 5 minutes late for recess. She jumped down the stairs, cut across the grass, and ran up to Lewis. There were no green balls left. There were no red balls left either. However, there was still the yellow ball. Didi played jump rope with Joy and Mauricia. It was no better than hopscotch. So, Didi's problem was to figure out a way to get a green ball, or at least a red ball. You already know that this story also contains a solution, so Didi figured it out. See if you can too. Remember everything you know about Didi, Wayside School, and Mrs. Jules. Hint. The next day, Didi brought a cream cheese and jelly sandwich, some nuts, and shredded cheese in her lunchbox. Here's what happened. Just before recess, Didi smeared the cream cheese and jelly all over her face. Then she stuffed her mouth with nuts and hung the shredded cheese from her nose. When she closed her eyes, she looked just like a dead rat. Todd was in on the plan. Mrs. Jules, he called, there's a dead rat in the classroom. Mrs. Jules was very put out. I want that dead rat outside immediately. When Mrs. Jules said immediately, she meant it. Didi instantly found herself outside on the playground. I want a green ball, she said. Lewis pretended that he hadn't heard her. May I please have a green ball? Asked Didi. Lewis gave her a green ball. I don't know how you did it, Didi, but you're first today, he said. When Mrs. Jules found out that Didi and Todd had tricked her, she sent Todd home early on the kindergarten bus. Didi threw the green ball on the ground. It bounced 50 feet straight up in the air, and then she caught it. "You don't like me, do you?" she asked Louis. "Sure I do," said Louis. "No, you don't," said Didi. "Yes, I like you," said Louis. "No, you don't," Didi insisted. "Yes, I like you, I really do," said Louis. "Are you sure?" asked Didi. "Yes," said Louis. "Don't you believe me?" "I guess so," said Didi. "Do you like me?" asked Louis. "You bet," said Didi. "You're my best friend." "Terrific," said Louis. "I always wanted to be best friends with a dead rat." End of chapter 15. Good morning, Disney. How was a dead rat talking? I'm concerned about this. Same. Didi, are you a dead mousy looking kid? Oh, I forgot to show you the picture of Didi. I forgot. There we go. I've been trying to do that at the beginning of each chapter, and I forgot. Thank you for shouting out Disney. Taking 10 stairs at a time sounds like a good way to break legs. Good advice for being an actor. Thank you. Oh!
Yay, our Twitch baby will be here next month.
Yay! Thank you so much, Arox. I appreciate it. How are you? Is it strange that my school also had a yellow ball that no one likes? Jump down 30 stories of stairs at once, Didi. It's fine. Tries to remember. Cheese on face equals dead rat? LOL, I love this. Blue ball, go down the hole. We did not have dead rats, but we do have live mice. I'm doing good today, Arox. Thank you so much. Thank you for the claps. Thank you for the hype. Thank you for the resub. I really appreciate it. Okay. We are moving along. Music levels are still good, I assume, because nobody said anything. It seems kind of loud to me, but I also have my speakers up a little bit, so I'm going to cut my own speakers down. Okay. Chapter 16. DJ. DJ skipped up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jules' room. He was grinning from ear to ear, from nose to chin, from here to there and back again. "Hey, DJ," Todd shouted. "Glad to see you." Todd was a pushover for smiling faces. Mrs. Jules heard him. She began to write Todd's name on the board under discipline, but when she saw DJ's smile, she put down the chalk. "Good morning, DJ," she said. "What are you so happy about?" DJ grinned and shrugged his shoulders. Mrs. Jules smiled. Damien looked at the smile on Mrs. Jules' face, then at Todd's, then finally at DJ's. Then Damien smiled, too. His smile was almost as big as DJ's. They were best friends. Once they saw the two of them smiling, the rest of the class could not help but smile. Rondi had a very cute one due to her 2 missing front teeth. Nobody had an ugly smile. Jason came to school late. He was very upset, but the first thing he saw was Damien's smile, and he felt a little bit better. Then he saw Rondi's toothless grin, and he even began to smile a little himself. But when he saw the piano on DJ's face, he fell laughing onto the floor. Everybody started to laugh, even Cathy, and she hardly ever laughed except when someone hurt himself. The whole room seemed to be laughing, not just the people in it. The blackboard chuckled, the ceiling snickered, the desks were jumping up and down, and the chairs were slapping one another on the back. The floor was very ticklish. It laughed until the walls turned purple. The waste paper basket started to sing, and all the pencils stood up and danced. Finally, things began to settle down. Mrs. Jules wiped her eyes and said, "DJ, why don't you tell the class why you're so happy? At least let us know what we're laughing about." But DJ just kept on smiling. "Aw, come on, DJ," said Didi. "Tell us." DJ didn't say a word. He couldn't because his mouth was stretched out of shape. "Let us guess," said Ron. "If we guess right, will you tell us?" DJ nodded his head. His smile had begun to hurt his ears. Everyone took one guess. Have you been swimming? Is it your birthday? Are you in love? Did you get a green ball? Nobody guessed right. At recess, DJ was still smiling. Louis, the yard teacher, called, "Hey DJ, come here." They walked to a far corner of the playground where they were alone. "What's up, DJ?" Louis asked. DJ just smiled. "Come on, DJ, you can tell me. Why are you so happy?" DJ looked up at him. He said, "You need a reason to be sad. You don't need a reason to be happy." End of chapter 16. DJ got big teeths. DJ with that "it wasn't me" smile. QCD gonna burn it up. The floors can be tickled. They can when DJ's on acid. Oh man. Did you get a facelift? Thank you for the claps. Thank you for the claps. Claps. Snaps. We're just moving right along through these chapters. Some are obviously shorter than others. Like that was a very short chapter. It was like 2 pages. Okay, chapter 17. John. John had light brown hair and a round head. He was Joe's best friend. John was one of the smartest boys in Mrs. Jewell's class, but he had one problem. He could only read words written upside down. Nobody ever wrote anything upside down. But it was only a little problem. John was still in the high reading group. He just turned his book upside down. It was easier for John to turn his book upside down than learn to read correctly, but the easiest way isn't always the best way. Mrs. Jewell said, "John, you can't go on reading like this. You can't spend the rest of your life turning your books upside down." "Why not?" asked John. "Because I said so," said Mrs. Jewell. "Besides, what happens when I write something on the blackboard? You can't turn the blackboard upside down." "No, I guess you're right," said John. "I know I'm right," said Mrs. Jewell. "You are going to have to learn to stand on your head." John couldn't stand on his head. He'd given up trying. You would have too if you'd fallen over as many times as he had. Joe was John's best friend. He could stand on John's head. Every time John fell over, Joe stood on his head. After all, what are best friends for? "My head is too round, Mrs. Jewell. I can't stand on it." "Of course you can, John," said Mrs. Jewell. "If Joe can stand on your head, so can you." "It's easy, John," said Joe. "I can't," John repeated. "I always fall over." "Nonsense," said Mrs. Jewell. "All you have to do is find your center of balance. Now, up you go." John put his round head on the floor and swung his legs up. He fell right over. Then Joe stood on John's head. "See, John, it's easy, nothing to it," Joe said. "We will help you, John," said Mrs. Jewell. "Joe, get off John's head and get the pillow from under my desk. Nancy, Calvin, come here and give us a hand." Mrs. Jewell took the pillow from Joe and set it on the floor. "All right, John, we'll surround you," she said. "We will not let you fall." John put his head on the pillow and swung his legs up. He started to fall one way, but Nancy pushed him back up. Then he started to fall another way, but Calvin straightened him out. John kept on falling a little bit this way and that until at last he found his center of balance. I want you to see this. Focus. It's upside down. "Hey, look at me, said John. I'm up. I'm really up. I'm standing on my head. I found my center of balance. It's beautiful. I can read the blackboard. Hey, Calvin, bring me a book, and you don't have to turn it upside down." "Hey, who? Ah! Bam!" While Calvin went to get the book, John fell flat on his face. "You better stay off my head, Joe," he warned. Are you all right, John? Asked Mrs. Jules. Yeah, I think so. I feel a little funny. Hey, I can still read the blackboard and I'm not upside down. Well, I can read right side up now. When I fell, I must have flipped my brain over or something. That is wonderful, John, said Mrs. Jules. Here, put the pillow back under my desk, and as a reward you may have a Tootsie Roll Pop. They're in the coffee can on top of my desk. John placed the pillow on top of her desk. Then he looked under the desk, but he couldn't find the Tootsie Roll Pops anywhere. End of chapter 17. I tried to flip, so when there's a paragraph in the book that's upside down, and I was trying to show that to you guys, and my camera wouldn't focus on it. I am finishing the book today, correct. What an outcast. Yeah, it's 30 chapters for 30 books. Or for 30 floors, not 30 books. Watch me turn it upside down. Build some monkey bars and let John hang upside down. That's a good idea. I wish my school classes were on how to stand on your head. Poor round head. That's called a concussion, John. John was in a coma. Whoa! For the rest of the school year. How did you do that? Whoa! How did you do that magic trick? Please tell us. Wow. Dr. Terror, House of Horror, and Magic. Wow. All right. Nice. Terror does have skills. All right, moving along to chapter 18. Leslie. Leslie had 5 fingers on each hand and 5 toes on each foot. For each hand, she had an arm, and for each foot, she had a leg. She was a very lucky girl. And she had 2 lovely long brown pigtails that reached all the way down to her waist. When Mrs. Jules asked a question, Leslie could raise one of her hands. When Leslie was adding, she could count on her fingers. When Paul pulled one of her pigtails, she could kick him with one foot while standing on the other. But Leslie had one problem. She didn't know what to do with her toes. She had 10 adorable little toes and nothing to do with them. As far as she could tell, they served no useful purpose. Suck your toes, that's what I do, said Sherry. But Leslie's foot wouldn't reach her mouth. Well, that's what all toes are good for, said Sherry. She put her foot in her mouth and went to sleep. No, thought Leslie, they must be good for something. They just have to be. During recess, she asked Dana, Dana, what do you do with your toes? Well, I scratch the back of my legs, said Dana. First, I scratch my left leg with my right foot, and then I scratch my right leg with my left foot. But my legs don't itch, said Leslie. Well, that's good, said Dana. In that case, you can scratch my legs. With your help, I could scratch both legs at the same time. No, never mind, said Leslie. She walked up behind Louis, the yard teacher, and hopped on his shoulders. Louis, said Leslie, I don't know what to do with my toes. Louis tugged her foot. Yes, that's a serious problem, he said, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take them off your hands for you, or rather, your feet. Just cut them off and give them to me. What? Asked Leslie. Well, you don't want them, so I'll take them, said Louis. You won't have to worry about them ever again. No, said Leslie. I'll give them to Miss Mush, said Louis. She can make little hot dogs out of them. Miss Mush was the lunch teacher. No, I'm not giving my toes away, said Leslie. All right, said Louis. I'll give you a nickel apiece for them. No, you can't have them, said Leslie. Why not? Louis asked. They're no good to you anyhow, and think of all you could buy for 50 cents. The bell rang. I'll think it over, said Leslie. She ran back to class. Mrs. Jules, said Leslie, I don't see any reason for keeping my toes. Oh, Leslie, I'm sure there are lots of good reasons, said Mrs. Jules. Well, I can't think of any. My legs don't itch. I can't get my foot in my mouth. Lewis offered me a nickel apiece for him, and it seems to me like a good deal, but I wanted to check with you first. I think Lewis was pulling your leg, said Mrs. Jules. No, said Leslie, he was pulling my toes. What would he want with your toes? Asked Mrs. Jules. I don't know, said Leslie, but if he's willing to give me 5 cents apiece for them, I'm going to take him up on it. I mean, that's 50 cents. At lunch, Leslie walked up to Lewis. Okay, Lewis, she said, you can have my toes for a nickel apiece. That'll be 50 cents. Not so fast, said Lewis. Let me look at 'em first. Leslie took off her shoes. Yes, said Lewis. The big ones are good and the ones next to them, but the most I'll give you for the rest of your toes is 3 cents each. Leslie was furious. 3 cents each? You told me 5 at recess. Well, I'll give you 5 cents for the big ones. Just look at that scrawny little runt of a toe at the end there. You're lucky to be even getting 3 cents for it. I think you're getting a darn good deal. I happen to like that toe, said Leslie. Fine then, said Lewis. Keep it. I'll just take the 2 big ones. We'll call it square. He reached in his pocket and pulled out a dime. Nothing doing, said Leslie. These toes are sold as a set. It's either all 10 for 50 cents or no deal. What am I going to do with just 8 toes? Then forget it, said Lewis. I'm not going to give you a nickel for those scrawny little end toes. Fine, said Leslie. No deal. My toes will still be here if you change your mind. She turned and walked toward the hopscotch area. Wait a second, Lewis called. I'll give you $1 each for your pigtails. Leslie turned around and looked at him with fiery eyes. Cut my hair? She exclaimed. Are you crazy? End of chapter 18. Yeah, put him in a sleeper hold, Leslie. Suck your toes. Yuck. Are you the toe fairy? Lewis must be a toe guy. Lewis sounds like your average Twitch troll. Yeah. I'll give you 5 bits for your toes. Toe discrimination. Snap his neck. Oh my god. Lord. Thank you for the claps. Toe, no. All right. Chapter 19. Miss Zarves. There is no Miss Zarves. There is no 19th story. Sorry. End of chapter 19. I'm going to take this moment to drink a little more coffee. Where are my claps for chapter 19? I'm just kidding. Thank you. The hopes one day a Twitch troll comes in with the name Lewis Wayside and asks for toes for bits. That would be actually kind of funny. Thank you for the claps. That was a long chapter. Wow. I need a break after that one. Woo! I know. Taking a break. Woo. I also need to cut some of that caffeine with this water. Miss Zarves is the teacher on the 19th floor, the 19th story that does not exist. Because the 19th floor doesn't exist, Miss Zarves does not exist. Skyward Sword music. Okay. Moving on to chapter 20. Cathy. Cathy doesn't like you. She doesn't know you, but she still doesn't like you. She thinks you're stupid. In fact, she thinks you're the stupidest person she doesn't know. What do you think of that? She also thinks you're ugly. As a matter of fact, she thinks you're the ugliest person she doesn't know. And she doesn't know a lot of people. She doesn't like the people she knows either. She hates everybody in Mrs. Jewell's class. She did like one member of the class. She liked Sammy. She thought he was funny. Sammy was a dead rat. But Cathy has good reasons for not liking any of the children she knows. She doesn't like DJ because he smiles too much. And she doesn't like John because he can't stand on his head. Cathy once had a cat named Skunks. She liked Skunks, but she was afraid that Skunks would run away. You have nothing to worry about, Cathy, said Mrs. Jewell. Skunks won't run away. Just be nice to him and feed him and pet him, and he won't run away. He may go out and play, but he will always come back. No, you're wrong, Mrs. Jewell, said Cathy. What do you know? He'll run away. So Cathy kept Skunks locked up in her closet at home. She never let him out and sometimes even forgot to feed him. One day, while Cathy was looking for her other shoe, Skunks ran out of the closet and never came back. You said he would come back, Mrs. Jewell, said Cathy. He never came back. You were wrong. I was right. That was why Cathy didn't like Mrs. Jewell. The next time I get a cat, I'll kill him, and then he'll never run away, said Cathy. Then there was the time that Damien tried to teach Cathy how to play catch. Damien said, when I throw you the ball, Cathy, just try to catch it. I can't catch it, said Cathy. I'll just get hurt. You won't get hurt, Damien insisted. Just watch the ball. He tossed it to her. But Cathy knew she'd get hurt, so she closed her eyes. The ball hit her on the cheek. It hurt. Cathy began to cry. You were wrong, she sobbed. I was right. And that was why Cathy didn't like Damien. Allison believed that if you're nice to someone, then they'll be nice to you. So one day she brought Cathy a cookie. I don't want your ugly cookie, said Cathy. It probably tastes terrible. Allison said, no, it's very good. I made it myself. Cathy said, if you made it, then it must stink. You can't cook. You're too stupid. She put the cookie in her desk along with her pencils, crayons, and books. 3 weeks later, Cathy was hungry. All right, Allison, she said, I'll try your stupid cookie. She took it out of her desk. It was covered with dust. She bit it. It was hard and tasted terrible. See, said Cathy, I was right. That was why Cathy didn't like Allison. Yes, Cathy had very good reasons for not liking anybody she knew. She also has good reasons for not liking you, and she doesn't even know you. Her reason is this. She knows that if you ever met her, you wouldn't like her. You don't like Cathy, do you? See? She was right. It's funny how a person can be right all the time and still be wrong. End of chapter 20. I don't know who Mrs. Arbs is, but she's probably related to that Rose Winter Springs, and what if she's ugly? That's never gonna die. Cathy sounds pretty spot on. Oh, please. Them's fighting words, Cathy. It's okay, Cathy. I don't like me either. No. We like you. You, Rose Winter Spring. Cathy's got some attitude. She's got very good reasons. I'm having so much fun reading this book. Okay. Chapter 21. Ron. Come on. Chapter 21. Out of focus, Ron. Ron had curly hair and little feet. I want to play kickball, he said. You can't play, said Terrence. Get out of here, said Didi. Scram, said Jason. I want to play kickball, said Ron. Well, you're not playing, said Terrence. Beat it. Ron stomped across the playground to the hopscotch area. Jenny was playing hopscotch with Lewis. Jenny was on 9. Lewis was still on 4, but it was his turn. I want to play kickball, Ron said. So go play kickball, said Lewis. Terrence won't let me play, said Ron. Lewis walked with Ron to the kickball field. Hey, what about our hopscotch game? Jenny asked. You won, said Lewis. I just beat Lewis in hopscotch, Jenny announced. Leslie, Rondi, and Allison flocked around her. Hey, Lewis, Damien shouted. Do you want to play kickball? All right, said Lewis. Ron and I will both play. No, said Terrence. Ron is not playing. Anyone who wants to play can play, said Lewis. No, he can't, said Terrence. It's my ball. It isn't your ball, said Lewis. You gave it to me, said Terrence. I gave it to you to share, Lewis said, but if you can't share it, you can't have it. All right, said Terrence, but I get to pitch. Ron and I'll stand everybody, Lewis announced. All right, said Jason. We'll kill 'em. We'll murder 'em, said Didi. We'll smash 'em, said Myron. We'll see, said Lewis. Ron pitched, and Lewis played the other 8 positions. 20 minutes later, they finally got 3 outs. The score was 21-0. Ron was up first. Infield in, shouted Damien. Everybody stood within 10 feet of home plate. All right, Ron, Lewis shouted. Kick it over their heads. Ron kicked the ball only 3.5 feet. Todd picked it up and threw him out. Lewis was up. Everybody ran to the edge of the outfield. Still, Lewis kicked the ball over their heads for a home run. Everybody ran all the way back in for Ron's up. He kicked the ball only 2 feet. Didi tagged him out. Lewis kicked another home run. Ron then kicked the ball a foot and tripped over it on his way to first base. 3 outs. Ron and Lewis held the other team to only 5 runs the next inning. That was because the bell rang. Lunch was finally over. Lewis and Ron lost 26-2. Ron had had a wonderful time. The next day, Ron said, I want to play kickball. You can't play, said Terrence. Get out of here, said Jason. Scram, said Didi. I want to play kickball, Ron said to Lewis. Lewis walked with him to the kickball field. Ron and I'll stand all of you. Everybody liked the teams. Ron pitched while Lewis played the other 8 positions. They lost 57-2. After the game, Lewis took Ron aside. Listen, Ron, he said, why do you always want to play kickball? You can't kick, you can't field, you can't even run to first base, you just get smashed every game. Hey, now wait a second, said Ron. Don't go blaming it all on me, you're half the team too, you know. And with that, he punched Lewis in the stomach. And he punched a heck of a lot harder than he kicked. End of chapter 21. Ron, watch out. There's a ball coming right at your foot. Terrence, is that Terry in disguise? Sounds like me. It probably me. I did not know hopscotch was a competition game. Dodgeball was such a 90s gym class game. Or kickball. I was pretty good at dodgeball, but that was just because I was so small that I could just like turn sideways and nobody could hit me. Scram, said Didi. I'm a dead rat, said Sammy. The ball always ended up in my face. Oh no. Thank you for claps. We're getting on through. We've read 21 chapters and an intro. We're in the home stretch. Chapter 22. The 3 Erics. In Mrs. Jewell's class, there were 3 children named Eric. Eric Fry, Eric Bacon, and Eric Ovens. They were known throughout the school for being fat. Eric Fry sat at this end of the room, Eric Bacon sat in the middle of the room, and Eric Ovens sat at that end of the room. There was a joke around Wayside School that if all 3 Erics were ever on the same end of the room at the same time, the whole school would tip over. Eric Bacon hated jokes like that. That's not surprising. After all, he wasn't even fat. In fact, he was the skinniest kid in Mrs. Jewls' class, but nobody seemed to notice. The other 2 Erics were fat, so everyone just thought all Erics were fat. But I'm not fat, Eric Bacon insisted. What's your name? Asked Jason. Eric, said Eric Bacon. Then you're fat, Jason concluded. And pretty soon, skinny little Eric Bacon, the skinniest kid in Mrs. Jewls' class, had the nickname Fatso. Eric Fry really was fat. He was also the best athlete in Mrs. Jewls' class. His body was solid muscle, however, nobody ever noticed. The other 2 Erics were not very good at sports. Eric Ovens was clumsy. Eric Fatso Bacon was a good athlete for his size, but because he was so skinny, he just didn't have much power. So naturally, everybody just assumed that Eric Fry was also clumsy and weak. After all, his name was Eric. Whenever the other kids chose up teams, Eric Fry was the last one picked. They never noticed his home runs or the fabulous catches he made. Like all great athletes, he made the impossible look easy. Of course, the other kids did notice the one time he dropped the ball. Eric Fry was playing right field. Terrence belted a deep fly to the left. Eric Fry raced all the way across the field after the ball and at the last second dived at it. He caught it in midair on his fingertips, but as he hit the ground, the ball squirted loose. Well, what do you expect from Butterfingers, said Stephen. And since that time, Eric Fry has had the nickname Butterfingers. Eric Ovens was the nicest person in Mrs. Jewls' class. He treated everyone equally and always had a kind word to say, but because his name was Eric, everyone thought he was mean. Fatso was mean because everyone called him Fatso. Butterfingers was mean because he always had to play right field. So naturally, everyone just assumed that Eric Ovens was also mean. They called him Crabapple. Good morning, Allison, said Eric Ovens. How are you? Lay off, Crabapple, will ya? Answered Allison. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say anything at all. All 3 of the Erics had nicknames. It was better that way. Otherwise, when someone said, "Hey, Eric," no one would know to whom he was talking. One time, all the Erics would answer, and the next time, none of them would answer. But when someone said, "Hey, Crabapple," then Eric Ovens knew they were talking to him. And if someone said, "Hey, Butterfingers," Eric Fry knew they meant him. And when someone said, "Hey, Fatso," Eric Bacon knew that he was being called. End of chapter 22. Chapter 19 was the worst, though. I know. It made me so tired. Thank you for the host, Hammer. Same V, but then I was left toward the end alone, and I didn't want to throw it. Kids are cruel. Jason, a brilliant thinker. That's the thing. People will neglect the hundreds of good to great things you do, but vividly remember the one wrong thing you did. That's so true. Hi, Paige. Thank you for shouting out HS. Thank you for shouting out Hammer. Thank you for shouting out Paige. Thank you for the claps for chapter 22. I don't know what song this is from. Samurai Champloo, Sidetracked. But I like the song. Heck yeah. That was some neck action with my giraffe neck. That's an animu. Okay. Apparently they have a PS2 game. Okay. Moo. Are you making fun of my V-moo? I'm just kidding. Chapter 23. Allison. Allison had pretty blonde hair and always wore a sky blue windbreaker. Her windbreaker was the same color as her eyes. She was best friends with Rondi. Rondi had blonde hair too, but she was missing her 2 front teeth. Allison had all of her teeth. Allison used to say that she knocked Rondi's teeth out. Allison was very pretty, so all the boys in Mrs. Jewls' class teased her, especially Jason. But Allison said, "Leave me alone or I'll knock your teeth out like I did Rondi's." The boys didn't bother her after that. One day, Allison brought a tangerine for lunch. She took the peel off in one piece. Miss Mush, the lunch teacher, walked up to her. "Allison, may I have your tangerine?" she asked. Miss Mush always gave food to the children, so Allison was happy to give her tangerine to Miss Mush. Miss Mush shoved it in her mouth and swallowed it in less than 4 seconds. Allison left the lunchroom and walked down to the library. The lunchroom was on the 15th story. The library was on the 7th. Allison already had her book. She just went to the library because it was nice and quiet there. The librarian walked up to Allison. "What are you reading?" she asked. Allison told her the name of the book. "Well, that sounds like a good book," said the librarian. "I never read that one. May I borrow it?" The librarian always lent books to the children. Allison was glad to be able to return the favor. She gave the librarian the book and walked down the stairs outside to the playground. All of Allison's friends were playing freeze tag. Allison didn't feel like playing. She reached into the pocket of her sky blue windbreaker and took out a tennis ball. She bounced it a couple of times on the ground. Lewis came up to her. "Hi, Allison," he said. "May I play with your tennis ball?" Lewis always gave balls to play with to the children. Allison happily gave her ball to Lewis. Lewis threw the ball all the way to the other side of the playground, and then he went chasing after it. Allison didn't feel like doing anything. Jason ran up and tagged her. "You're frozen," he said. "Get out of here before I knock your teeth out," said Allison. Jason shrugged his shoulders and left. Allison went back inside and up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jewls' room. The lunch period wasn't over yet, but Allison didn't feel like doing anything else. She had given her food to the lunch teacher, her book to the librarian, and her ball to the yard teacher. She went inside her classroom. Mrs. Jewls was there. "Oh, Allison, I'm glad you're here," said Mrs. Jewls. "I'm having trouble with an arithmetic problem. Maybe you can help?" "Sure," said Allison. Mrs. Jewls always helped the children with their problems. Allison was happy to help. "How do you spell chair?" asked Mrs. Jewls. "Chair," said Allison. "Yes, that's right," said Mrs. Jewls. "I knew it wasn't Chare, but I just couldn't remember what it was." "Well, that's not an arithmetic problem," said Allison. "That's spelling." "Ah, yes, you're right again," said Mrs. Jewls. "I always get the two mixed up." The bell rang. The lunch period was over. Allison could hear the other children running up the stairs. "Allison," said Mrs. Jewls, "you learned a very important secret today, and I don't want you to tell any of the other children, not even Rondi." "Well, what was that?" asked Allison. She didn't even know she'd learned a secret. She loved secrets. "You learned that children are really smarter than their teachers," said Mrs. Jewls. "Oh, that's no secret," said Allison. "Everybody knows that." End of chapter 23. Oh, you're in the sky! Yes, because I'm at the 30th floor of Wayside School. Miss Mush, that's gross. You can win bar bets with that talent. Lewis playing fetch with himself. Yeah, Allison is a little bit of a pushover. Whoop! I almost threw my book on the floor. You slightly froze when you said frozen. That's weird. The stream was adding special effects. Mine froze twice at least last night. A fault of those people. I'm thinking that's an inside joke that I don't know about yet. Thank you for the claps. Okay. It is a replacement word for a word used a bit in the book, like, late last night. Oh, okay. I'll have to catch up. Chapter 24. Damien. Damien had hazel eyes with a little black dot in the middle of each of them. The dots were called pupils. So was Damien. He was a pupil in Mrs. Jewls' class. Mrs. Jewls was about to show the class a movie. She turned out the lights. When it was dark, Damien's pupils got bigger. "Damien," said Mrs. Jewls, "will you run downstairs and ask Louis if he'd like to see the movie with us?" Damien ran down the 30 flights of stairs to the playground. He stepped outside as Louis was hooking up a tetherball. "Hey, Louis," Damien called, "do you want to see a movie in Mrs. Jewls' class?" Louis rubbed his chin. "What movie?" he asked. Damien shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know," he said. "I'll be right back." Damien ran all the way back up the stairs to the 30th story. "Louis wants to know what movie," said Damien. "Does he want to know the name of the movie or what the movie is about?" asked Mrs. Jewls. I don't know," said Damien. "I'll ask him." Damien raced back down the stairs and out to the playground. "Louis, do you want to know the name of the movie or what the movie is about?" he asked. The name," said Louis. "Okay," said Damien. Damien hurried back up the 30 flights of stairs. He took the steps 2 at a time. "He wants to know the name," said Damien. "Turtles," said Mrs. Jewls. Damien turned around, took a deep breath, then ran back down the stairs. "Turtles," Damien told Louis. "Hey, that might be good," said Louis. "What's it about?" "I'm not sure," said Damien. "I'll find out." Damien raced back up the stairs, but first he stopped to take a drink of water. "What's it about, Mrs. Jewls?" asked Damien. "Turtles," said Mrs. Jewls. Damien rushed back down the stairs to tell Louis. "Turtles," said Damien. "No thanks," said Louis. "I don't like turtles. They're too slow." Damien lowered his head and slowly walked up the 30 flights of stairs. His legs were sore, he could hardly breathe, and his side ached. By the time he got to Mrs. Jewls' class, the movie was over. "All right, class," said Mrs. Jewls. "I want everybody to take out a piece of paper and a pencil and write something about turtles." Damien had missed the movie, but he still could have written something about turtles. Turtles are too slow. But now he couldn't find his pencil. It just was not his day. "What's the matter, Damien?" asked Mrs. Jewls. "I can't find my pencil," said Damien. "Class, Damien's pencil is missing," said Mrs. Jewls. "What did it look like, Damien?" she asked. "It was long and yellow," said Damien. "It had a black point at one end and a red eraser at the other." "I found it," said Todd, "here by the blackboard." "Yes, that's it," said Damien. "No, there it is in the corner by the wastebasket," said Crabapple. "Maybe that's it," said Damien. "Here it is," said John. "It's been in my desk the whole time." "No, here it is in my hand," said Joe. "I found it," said Rondi. "Here it is," said Allison. "I have it," laughed DJ. "I found it," said Myron. "Which one is yours, Damien?" asked Mrs. Jewls. Damien studied each pencil. "They all look like mine," he said. Fortunately, at that moment, Louis walked into the classroom. He handed Damien a pencil. "You dropped this when you were telling me about the movie," said Louis. "Thanks," said Damien. "Okay, class," said Mrs. Jewls. "So that we have no more mix-ups, I want everybody to write his name on his pencil." Damien spent the rest of the day trying to write his name on his pencil. Damien's pencil couldn't write on itself. It was just like his beautiful hazel eyes with the black dots in the middle. They could see everything except themselves. End of chapter 24. I finished studying Scarlet last night. Oh, it must be a book that you guys were talking about. Guess the girls can't write their names on the pencils? What? because Mrs. Jules said I want everybody to write his name on his pencil. I think it was just like, I mean, this book was written back in the 80s. I think it was just like a general. Oh, the first Sherlock Holmes story. Got it. I'm assuming you went and got the big thing. The big collection or whatever. Claps. Thank you. Okay. We have 6 more chapters. I love totals. Okay. Chapter 25. Jenny. Jenny came to school on the back of her father's motorcycle. She was late. Wayside school began at 9 o'clock. It was almost 9:30. She kissed her father goodbye, raced up the 30 flights of stairs to Mrs. Jules' room. "I'm sorry, I'm late, Miss Jules, but my father's motorcycle lost a..." There was nobody there. The room was empty. Hello? Hello? Mrs. Jules? Dana? Todd? Anyone? There was no one in the room. Maybe I'm early, Jenny thought. She looked up at the clock. It was exactly 9:30. Oh, I hope they didn't go on a field trip without me. She looked out the window. Nobody was there, not even Louis. Jenny didn't know what to do. She sat down at her desk. She watched the second hand go around on the clock. Well, I might as well catch up on my spelling, she thought. She opened her desk and took out her speller. M-U-D spells mud. Where is everybody? B-L-O-O-D spells blood. I hope nothing happened to them. B-L-A-C-K spells black. Jenny heard footsteps coming down the hall. She began to work very fast. H-A-C-K spells hack. S-M-A-C-K spells smack. Someone opened the door. Jenny turned around. Ack! She gasped. He was a man Jenny had never seen before. He had a black mustache, and a matching attaché case. Jenny jumped out of her seat. Get back in your seat, the man said. Jenny slowly sat down. The man walked over and sat down in Dana's seat, facing Jenny. He opened his attaché case and removed some papers. What is your name? He asked her. Jenny? Jenny whispered. Jenny? The man repeated as if he didn't believe her. Well, actually, it's Jennifer. Jenny for short, said Jenny. I see, said the man. He took the speller from Jenny's desk. Jenny's name was written across the top. He put the speller in his attaché case. What are you doing here, Jennifer? He asked. This is my classroom, said Jenny. Are you sure? The man asked. Well, yes, I think so. I mean... Well, where's the rest of your class? The man asked. I don't know, said Jenny. Maybe they went on a field trip. No, said the man. They did not go on a field trip. Well, I don't know where they are, Jenny cried. I was half an hour late today, and when I got here, everybody was gone. Really? Did something happen to them? The man didn't answer her. He wrote something on a piece of paper. Tell me something, Jennifer. When you came to school today and saw that nobody was here, weren't you somewhat puzzled? Yes, said Jenny. What happened to them? If you are really so concerned and so puzzled, said the man, why did you work on spelling? I don't know, said Jenny. It would seem to me, the man said, that if a child came to school and nobody was there, she might play games or walk around or go home, but certainly not work on spelling. Jenny started to cry. I didn't know what to do. I was late and I had to ride on a motorcycle and nobody was here, and now you're asking me all kinds of questions, and I'm afraid of what's happened to Dana and Mrs. Jules and Rondi and Allison. The man didn't understand a word she said. Jenny heard more footsteps. The man got up and opened the door. 2 more men came in. One had a black mustache like the first man. The other man was bald. Jenny was frightened by them. Does she know? Asked the newcomer with the mustache. She claims she knows nothing, the first man answered. She says she was late today, and when she got here everybody was gone. Do you believe her? Asked the man with the bald head. I'm not sure. She was working on her speller when I walked in. He reached into his attaché case and took out Jenny's speller. He handed it to the man with the bald head. The bald man read Jenny's name across the top of it. Tell me, Jenny, he said, why are you the only one here? I don't know, said Jenny. Has this ever happened before? He asked. No, never, said Jenny. He gave Jenny her speller. Put this inside your desk. Jenny put it away. I'm satisfied, said the man with the bald head. Okay, Jennifer, said the first man. You may go now. Jenny got out of her seat. Jenny, the bald man called. Jenny turned slowly around. Yes, she whispered. Next time, don't come to school on a Saturday. End of chapter 25. Okay, let's see. Did you watch the cartoon that was based on these books too? No, I honestly didn't know there was one. "30 flights of stairs. Hello? If I could find someone to build me a tortoise habitat, I would get one. Jenny had never seen a man before. I think they meant this man. Jenny, are you playing like a spelling trivia murder party minigame? Only boys before this was a man. Oh dear. Jenny, what did you do with your class? It's like a smaller, thinner type, I believe. Hi, Rock. How are you? I'm satisfied. An attaché was an aide to an ambassador, and those were the types of cases they used. Thank you for the claps. I was going to ask about the TV show because I remember watching only a couple episodes and being disappointed. Yeah, I honestly didn't know there was a show until I think somebody mentioned it, maybe. Like during last stream that I read this. I'm glad you're doing good. Okay. I am doing pretty good as well, thank you. Okay, Canadian. I'd be interested to watch a few episodes and see, but not sure. Not sure if I'd like it or not. Especially if it was close to the book and like it's kind of strange humor, then I probably would. But I'd be willing to give it a shot. Okay, next chapter. Chapter 26, Terrence. Terrence was a good athlete, but a bad sport. Rondi and Allison were playing two-square with a red ball. Can I play? Asked Terrence. No, Allison replied. You have to let me play, Terrence said. Lewis says we have to share the balls. Well, we're not sharing with you, said Allison. Oh, let him play, said Rondi. All right, said Allison. We'll play three-square. You better play right. I will, said Terrence. Allison bounced the ball to Rondi. Rondi bounced it over to Terrence. Terrence caught it and kicked it over the fence. You have to go get it, said Allison. Shut up, Dixie Cup, Terrence answered. Rondi ran and told Lewis. DJ and Damien were playing basketball. Uh-oh, here comes Terrence, said Damien. Hey, let me play, said Terrence. Get lost, Terrence, said Damien. You have to share the balls. Lewis says so, said Terrence. All right, just throw it in the basket. Don't kick it, said Damien. I won't, said Terrence. First, Damien took a shot. It bounced off the backboard and through the hoop. Next, DJ took a shot. He threw it underhand way up in the air. It came down through the hoop without touching the rim. Then Terrence took a shot. He kicked it over the fence. You idiot, said Damien. Take a train, peanut brain. Terrence answered. DJ went and told Lewis. Stephen, Calvin, Joe, John, and Leslie were playing Spud. Stephen was it. Everyone else had a number. Stephen had to throw the ball up in the air and call out a number. The person who had that number had to try to catch it. Can I play? Asked Terrence. No, said Calvin, you'll just kick the ball over the fence. No, said Joe. No way, said John. No, said Leslie. Sure, said Stephen. Newcomers are it. He gave the ball to Terrence. Throw the ball up in the air and call out a number between 1 and 5. Okay, said Terrence. The children formed a circle around Terrence. 1,000,000! Yelled Terrence as he kicked the ball over the fence. What did you do that for? Asked Terrence. Eat a frog, warthog, said Terrence. Stephen ran and told Lewis. Terrence looked around. There was nothing to do. There were no balls left. Lewis walked up to him. He was followed by Allison, Rondi, Damien, DJ, Stephen, Calvin, Joe, John, and Leslie. What's the matter, Terrence? Asked Lewis. There are no balls, said Terrence. Do you have a green ball? No, said Lewis. All of my balls have mysteriously disappeared. Darn it, said Terrence. There's nothing left to kick. Nothing left to kick, said Lewis. Oh, I don't know about that. What do you think, Rondi? Is there anything left to kick? Rondi thought a minute. Then she smiled. She was missing her 2 front teeth. Yes, I think there's something left to kick, she said. Well, where is it? Asked Terrence. Well, let me check with Allison, said Lewis. Allison, is there anything left to kick? He winked at her. There sure is, Allison said. What? Asked Terrence. Well, how about you, Damien? Asked Lewis. Can you think of anything? Damien nodded his head yes. Well, what is it? Said Terrence. He couldn't wait. DJ, we got anything around here to kick? Asked Lewis. DJ smiled. Yes, we do, he said. Give it to me, Terrence demanded. Well, I don't know if I should, said Lewis. What do you think, Calvin? Should I give it to him? I think you should, said Calvin. You heard Calvin, said Terrence. Give it to me. Well, not so fast, said Lewis. Leslie, should I give it to him? Oh, yes, I think he deserves it, said Leslie. Give it to me, Terrence repeated. Do you also think he deserves it, Joe? Asked Lewis. Yes, I think so, said Joe. What about you, John? Asked Lewis. Definitely. Give it to him, John answered. Come on, said Terrence. Recess is almost over. We'll leave it up to Stephen, said Lewis. Whatever he says goes. Let him have it, said Stephen. You heard him, Lewis, said Terrence. Let me have it. Okay, said Lewis. He picked Terrence up and kicked him over the fence. End of chapter 26. It's on YouTube's. It's Pretty Tom Central. What? Ooh, water. I played Foursquare. I think something about it works better in book form, maybe because cartoon worlds are too free. I can't explain what I'm thinking. There are 3, to answer your question, Paige, about are they random stories or do they come together? So there are 3 books in the Wayside School series. This first book kind of introduces the school, which is, at the very beginning, it explains that the construction, like the guy who built the school, read the blueprint sideways, and he was supposed to be 1 story with 30 classrooms, and instead he built 30 stories with 1 classroom on each floor. He said he was very sorry. But this kind of introduces kind of the school, and the book series focuses on the classroom at the top of the school on the 30th floor with the teacher is Mrs. Jules, Lewis is the yard teacher, and then all of the students in the 30th story classroom. So this first book just introduces each individual character and gives them their own chapter to kind of learn about them and their personality. And then books 2 and 3 are much more typical novel style, although they still focus on that classroom. But this first book basically just gives each character their own chapter in order to kind of help you learn more about them. They reference one another here and there. I'm not throwing away my shot. Just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry. Did you guys see that early this morning, Lin-Manuel Miranda announced that the official Broadway show with the original cast is coming to Disney Plus on July 3rd. I don't know if you guys saw that. Terrence is a winner. This kid should make a diss track with all the rhymes. Kick the bucket. Then they plotted Terrence's murder. I have them, yeah. I read these books a lot growing up. I think they were written in the 80s, but I read them a lot growing up. Yes, Hamilton is, the official Broadway tour is coming to Charleston in the 2021 to 2022 season. I'm super excited. I'm definitely going. Yeah, I'm going to read them all on stream eventually. Yeah, I'm super hyped. It's going to be great. Okay, moving along. Chapter 27, Joy. Joy had forgotten her lunch at home. It was lunchtime. She was hungry. She didn't have a meal ticket. If she had had a meal ticket, she could have had a lunch from Miss Mush, the lunch teacher. She'd have to be terribly hungry to eat a lunch made by Miss Mush. Even an empty brown paper sack would taste better, but that's how hungry Joy was. Damien hadn't forgotten his lunch. He had brought a lovely turkey sandwich, a big piece of chocolate cake, and a crisp red apple. All he needed was a glass of milk. He could get that from Miss Mush. Miss Mush didn't know how to ruin milk. Damien left his lunch on his desk and went to the end of the milk line. Joy didn't waste any time. She reached into Damien's sack and took out the apple. Then she spotted the turkey sandwich. She put back the apple, took the sandwich, and noticed the chocolate cake. She put back the sandwich and took out the cake. But then Joy had second thoughts. She put back the cake and she grabbed Damien's whole lunch. First, she ate the sandwich. It was in a baggie. When she finished the sandwich, she placed the baggie on Jason's desk. Next, she ate the chocolate cake. It was wrapped in wax paper. She put the wax paper on Allison's desk. She ate the apple last, and she placed the apple core on Didi's desk. Then she put the empty sack on Calvin's desk. Damien returned with his glass of milk. "Mrs. Jules, my lunch is gone," he called. "Well, I wonder where it could be," said Mrs. Jules. "Calvin took it," said Joy. "There's the empty sack on his desk." "Good work, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. "Calvin, I'm ashamed of you." She wrote Calvin's name on the blackboard under the word discipline. "Look, the baggie from Damien's turkey sandwich is on Jason's desk," Joy called. "Very good, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. "But how did you know that Damien had a turkey sandwich?" "I'm just smart," said Joy. Mrs. Jules wrote Jason's name on the blackboard under Calvin's. "And there's the wax paper from the delicious chocolate cake on Allison's desk," Joy announced. Joy had chocolate all around her mouth. Allison stood firm. She looked into Mrs. Jules' eyes. "I did not eat that cake," she said. "The evidence is there on your desk," said Mrs. Jules. Joy spotted it. She wrote Allison's name under Jason's. "Damien's apple core is on Didi's desk," said Joy. "Very good, Joy," said Mrs. Jules. She wrote Didi's name under Allison's. "Damien, I think you ought to thank Joy," said Mrs. Jules. "She solved the mystery." "Thank you, Joy," said Damien. Just then, Louis, the yard teacher, walked in. "I have your lunch, Joy," he said. "Your mother brought it. You left it at home." "You mean you didn't have a lunch?" asked Mrs. Jules. "You must be very hungry." "No," said Joy, "not really. Since Damien didn't get to eat, he can have it." "Well, thanks a lot," said Damien. "You're the greatest." He ate Joy's lunch, an old bologna sandwich, and a dried-up carrot. "Joy, for being such a good detective and for being so generous with your lunch, you may help yourself to a Tootsie Roll Pop," said Mrs. Jules. "They're in the coffee can on top of my desk." Joy took one. Then, when Mrs. Jules wasn't looking, she took another. Calvin, Jason, Allison, and Didi had their names on the blackboard under the word discipline, but they were good the rest of the day, so at 2 o'clock Mrs. Jules erased them. They forgot about the whole thing. Damien had a lousy lunch instead of a great lunch, but 5 minutes later it didn't make any difference. He couldn't taste it anymore and he was full. He went outside to play basketball and forgot about the whole thing. Joy had a great lunch and 2 Tootsie Roll Pops. But 5 minutes later it didn't make any difference. She couldn't taste it anymore and she was full, and at dinner time she was hungry just the same. But a horrible thing happened. Joy couldn't forget about filching Damien's lunch, and for the rest of the year, every turkey sandwich, piece of chocolate cake, apple, and Tootsie Roll Pop tasted like Miss Mush's porridge. Heh, Joy, take that. End of chapter 27. Yes, I'm probably going to read them all on stream, yes. Tickets are going to be a pain, but I'm going to do my best. Why is it the lunch teacher? Should it also be the library teacher? What? Miss Mush is the lunch lady. She's not the librarian. All these kids are brats. It'd be boring if they were all perfect little angels, true. She erased them. Thank you for the claps. Thank you for the claps. We're getting toward the end, y'all. Only 3 more chapters. We've got 2 more students and a teacher, and we're done. Oh, she's called a lunch teacher. Yeah, I don't know. She teaches you about lunch. Chapter 28. Nancy. Nancy had big hands and big feet. He didn't like his name. He thought it was a girl's name. None of the other children in Mrs. Jewell's class thought that Nancy's name was odd. They didn't think of it as a girl's name or a boy's name. Nancy was just the name of the quiet kid with the big hands and feet who sat over there in the corner next to John. Nancy was very quiet and shy. He was ashamed of his name. He had only one friend, a girl who went to class on the 23rd story of Wayside School. They were friends for a good reason. He didn't know her name and she didn't know his. They just called each other, "Hey, you," or just plain "you." Nancy was afraid to ask his friend what her name was because then he might have to tell her his name. He never could figure out why she never asked, but he was happy to just leave well enough alone. One morning, Nancy and his friend were late. When they got to the 23rd story, his friend's teacher was waiting outside. "Hurry up, you're late, Mac," said the teacher. Nancy's friend turned red. She didn't move. "Come on, Mac, shake a leg, get the lead out," said the teacher. Words. Your name is Mac?" said Nancy. Mac was very pretty. She had red hair and freckles. She covered her face and ran into the room. "My name is Nancy," Nancy called after her. Mac stepped back outside. I was afraid to tell you my name," she said. "Me too," said Nancy. "Nancy's a girl's name." "Well, I think it's cute," said Mac. "Well, I like the name Mac," said Nancy. "Mac is a boy's name," said Mac. "My mother had a rich aunt named Nancy," said Nancy. "That's why she gave me the name." "My mother once had a dog named Mac," said Mac. Hey, do you want to trade?" Nancy asked. "Can we?" asked Mac. I don't see why not," said Nancy. "Okay," said Mac. They both spun around 100 times in opposite directions until they were so dizzy that they fell over. When they stood up, Mac was Nancy and Nancy was Mac. They said goodbye. Then Mac raced up to Mrs. Jewell's room. He was no longer shy. "Hi, everybody. My name is Mac," he announced. "I traded names." He held out his big hand. Todd jumped up and shook it. "Hi, Mac," he said. "Glad to meet you." "How you doing, Mac?" said Ron. "Howdy, Mac," said Terrence. "Nice to see you, Mac," said Bebe. "You traded names?" asked Jason. Jason didn't like his name either. "That's right, Jason, old boy," said Mac. "Is that allowed?" asked Jason. "Why not?" said Mac. "Hey, anybody want to trade?" Jason called. "I'll trade with you," said Terrence. He didn't like his name either. "Wait, no, I'll trade with you, Terrence," said Mauricia. Mauricia didn't like her name. "No, he's trading with me," said Jason. "I'll trade with you, Mauricia," said Damien. No thanks, said Mauricia. I'll trade with you, Damien, said Mrs. Jules. No, I want to be Mrs. Jules, said Stephen. It turned out that nobody in Mrs. Jules' class liked their name. The children all spun around in different directions until they got so dizzy that they fell over. And when they stood up again, nobody knew who anybody was. What are we going to do, Mrs. Jules? Asked Leslie, who was really Eric Bacon. My name is not Mrs. Jules, it's Mauricia, answered Terrence, who was really Jason. It is not, I'm Mauricia, said Didi, who was really Joe. You're both wrong, said Mauricia. I'm Mrs. Jules. This went on for an hour. At last they figured out who the real Rondi was. She was missing her 2 front teeth. After they figured out Rondi, they were able to get Allison pretty quickly, and then from there they got DJ, Damien, and Mrs. Jules because she was the oldest one. Eventually they figured out who everybody really was. They had some difficulty deciding which Eric was which, and actually they are still not absolutely sure. Everyone just decided to keep his own name. The children didn't like them, but it made things much easier. Mac and Nancy kept their new names, but when they were together, they still called each other Hey You, or just plain You. End of chapter 28. Poof, they're gone. She's a teacher in charge of lunch. Nancy Drew? Oh, how progressive. A girl named Drew. Is this a boy named Sue? I don't think it's a thing. She was wanted by the law. She couldn't say his name. Hello, Ursus. How are you? Mac is in McDonald's? Maybe. Like Secret World of Alex Mac. I have to work soon. Not so good. How are you? I'm good. I'm off today. That could be, yeah, short for Mackenzie. LOL. I hope they all trade names to make everything confusing. Wow, Tara calling things. I almost spit out my water. What part made you spit out your water? Didi. The sentence explaining who the one kid was hilarious. Wait, what? The sentence explaining who the one kid is was hilarious. I'm still confused, CJ, but I'm glad you were amused by something. We're almost done, boys and girls. Buckle on in. Okay. Somebody said something and then they said it was somebody who was actually... Oh, I see. And that went on for a little bit. Gotcha. Okay. Chapter 29. Stephen. Stephen had green hair. He had purple ears and a blue face. He wore his sister's pink dancing shoes and green leotards. The leotards matched his hair. He was all dressed up as a goblin for Mrs. Jules' Halloween party. But unfortunately, it wasn't Halloween. You sure look stupid, said Jason. Jason was Stephen's best friend. So do you, said Stephen. Boy, are you dumb, said Jenny. Halloween is on Sunday. Today is only Friday. You're the one who's dumb, said Stephen. You'd probably come to school on a Sunday. Mrs. Jules said we'd have the party today, but none of the other children wore costumes, only Stephen. All right, class, said Mrs. Jules, it's time for a Halloween party. See, said Stephen. Mrs. Jules gave each child a cookie that looked like an orange witch with a black hat. She laughed when she saw Stephen, and she forgot to give him one. Stephen didn't ask for it because he was afraid she'd laugh again. The children finished their cookies in less than 30 seconds. All right, class, said Mrs. Jules. Party's over. We have a lot of work to do. Stephen felt like a fool. The party lasted less than a minute, and he had to spend the rest of the day wearing his stupid goblin suit. Look, Stephen's wearing his sister's leotards, laughed Dana. They're green just like his hair, said Fatso. Everybody laughed. Mrs. Jules began the arithmetic lesson. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 + 2 = 5. That's wrong, Joy shouted. Mrs. Jules tried again. 2 + 2 = 3. That wasn't right either. She added 2 and 2 again and got 43. It was useless. No matter how hard she tried, she could not get 2 + 2 to equal 4. I don't understand it, she said. They've always equaled 4 before. Suddenly she screamed. The chalk turned into a squiggling worm. She dropped it on her foot. Then all the lights went out, and the blackboard lit up like a movie screen. A woman appeared on the screen. She had a long tongue and pointed ears. She stepped off the screen and into the classroom. It was the ghost of Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf ran her fingernails across the blackboard. "Trick or treat, you rotten kids," she said. "Now I'll get even with every last one of you. Where's Todd?" "Who is that?" asked Mrs. Jules. "Mrs. Gorf," said Damien. "Who's Mrs. Gorf?" asked Mrs. Jules. "She was the meanest teacher we ever had," said Rondi. "What happened to her?" asked Mrs. Jules. "Louis ate her," said Jason. "Well, I'm not going to allow this," said Mrs. Jules. "Get out of my classroom," she demanded. "It's Halloween, sweet teacher," said Miss Gorf. "Ghosts can go anywhere they like. I've come for a little class reunion." "But it isn't Halloween," said Mrs. Jules. "Halloween is still 2 days away." "I know," said Mrs. Gorf, "but Halloween falls on Sunday this year, so we're celebrating it on the Friday before." Stephen leapt up from his seat. "See, I was right," he said. "Today is the day we celebrate it, the Friday before. Mrs. Gorf proved it." He ran up to Mrs. Gorf. "They all laughed at me and made me feel stupid because I was the only one who got dressed up, but they were the ones who were wrong. You and I are right." He put his arms around Mrs. Gorf and hugged her. Mrs. Gorf gasped and disappeared. The lights came back on. Mrs. Jules picked up the piece of chalk from the floor. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 + 2 = 4. "That's good," she said. "When 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, anything can happen." All of the children who had laughed at Stephen now called him a hero, but they told him to change out of his stupid costume. So at lunch, Stephen went home, washed up, and changed. He came back wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt. Of course, his hair was still green. It always was. End of chapter 29. I'm sorry that I've dropped a few frames today. I don't know if it's Twitch or my internet. I was buckled in for this wild ride from the start. Stephen had a look all his own. Only a Jenny would go to school on the weekend. What a party. What kind of teacher is this? It was the ring girl. Yeah, the apple lady. Dear God, no. Just throw her out the window like a dead rat. They didn't throw the dead rat out the window. They just threw him away. They threw all of his raincoats out the window. I'm glad you like my witchy voice. How did he hug a ghost? Goblin hands, probably. Thank you for the claps. We have one more chapter. That's it. All right. Chapter 30, Louis. Louis had a red face and a mustache of many colors. He was the yard teacher at Wayside School. It was his job to see that the children didn't have too much fun during lunch and recess. And if you haven't already guessed, he is the one who wrote this book. On June 10th, there was a blizzard. Wow. Louis was afraid that the children would have too much fun, so nobody was allowed outside. "Class," said Mrs. Jules, "after you finish your lunch today, come back up to the classroom. You're not allowed outside." The children all went to the lunchroom. Miss Mush had made tuna surprise. They looked at it, then hurried back up the stairs. There was nothing to do. "Now, class," said Mrs. Jules, "I know that you're all bored, but I have a special surprise for you." "I hope it's better than the tuna surprise," said Mauricia. Mrs. Jules continued, "Louis is going to come up and entertain us. He will tell us a story. I want you all to be on your best behavior." When Louis walked in, all the children booed. "Are you going to tell us a story?" asked Bibi. "Yes," said Louis. Well, it better be good, BB warned. It better be better than the tuna surprise, said Butterfingers. I thought the tuna surprise was good, said Louis. You'd eat dirt if they put enough ketchup on it, said Mac. Hey, everybody be quiet, said Todd. Let him tell the story. Not too loud, Louis, said Sherry. I'm trying to get some sleep. Louis sat in the middle of the room, and all the children gathered around. Louis began his story. This is a story about a school very much like this one, but before we get started, there's something you ought to know so you don't get confused. In this school, every classroom is on the same story. Which one? The 18th? Asked Jenny. No, said Louis. They are all on the ground. The school is only 1 story high. Not much of a school, laughed Damien. Louis continued. Now, you might think that the children there are strange and silly. That's probably true. However, when I told them stories about you, they thought you were strange and silly. Us, the children answered. How are we strange? I'm normal, said Stephen, aren't I? As normal as I am, Joe assured him. The children at that school must be crazy, said Leslie. Real Lulus, Mauricia agreed. Tell us about them, Louis, BB demanded. For one thing, Louis said, none of these children has ever been turned into an apple. Pfft, that's silly, said Didi. Everybody's been turned into an apple. It's a part of growing up. Louis continued. Dead rats don't walk into the classroom wearing raincoats. What do they wear? Tuxedos? Asked Todd. And girls never try to sell their toes, Louis added. Well, no wonder, said Leslie, at today's prices. Louis continued. They don't trade names or read upside down. They can't turn mosquito bites into numbers. They don't count the hairs on their heads. The walls don't laugh, and 2 + 2 always equals 4. This is horrible, said Damien. That's not the worst of it, said Louis. They have never tasted Mauricia-flavored ice cream. A hush fell over the classroom. Mrs. Jules, I'm scared, said Allison. Is there really a school like that? Of course not, said Mrs. Jules. Louis is just telling a story. It was a good story, said Leslie. I thought it was stupid, said Cathy. I liked it, said Rondi. It was funny. Mrs. Jules said, Louis, it was a very entertaining story, but we really don't go for fairy tales in here. I'm trying to teach my class the truth. That's all right, said Louis. I have to go down to room 29 now and tell them a story. He started out the door. Class, said Mrs. Jules, let's all thank Louis for the wonderful story. Everybody booed. End of chapter 30 and end of book. Just throw her out the window like the dead rat's raincoats. No, it's fine. You remember pretty good. Just one small detail. Thank you, Louis. And it says Louis right here. So obviously, he was telling the truth when he said Louis wrote this book. Claps! How did you do one upside down? One. Did you figure out how to do upside down writing? No, you're not the worst. It's not the truth. Like Mrs. Jules, I'm trying to teach my class the truth. All right. Well, I thought about doing a double stream today, but there's some other things I could do, and I'd like to maybe do like some reading outside because the weather's really nice. So I think I'm not going to do a double stream today, and I apologize about that. I think I'm just going to call it here. Accident! Thank you for clapping for me as well. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful weekend. Wow, did I just say weekend and it's Tuesday? I hope when you get to your weekend that it's fantastic. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Please take care of yourselves, as of course being safe and healthy. But I will be streaming tomorrow. We'll be doing Best Wednesday as normal, so I'll see you guys tomorrow for Best Wednesday. Have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. Much love. I'll see you soon, and bye-bye.